welcome to IndianExpress.com. We are here to discuss an age-old controversy that has been making news recently, which is about the Katchatheevu Island. Prime Minister Narendra Modi recently criticized the Congress party for callously giving away the Katchatheevu Island to Sri Lanka in 1974. Now, while this issue has been raised from time to time in the past, this recent attack by PM Modi has come right before the Lok Sabha polls that are scheduled for later this month. I'm joined by Professor Arup Chatterjee, who has written in the past a comprehensive article on the Katchatheevu issue in the Indian Express research section. Professor Chatterjee teaches at the OP Jindal Global University and has authored multiple books, his latest being a historical and political account of Adam's Bridge or Ram Setu. Welcome to our show, Professor Chatterjee. Now, to begin with, could you tell us where exactly is the Katchatheevu Island located?
Good morning, Advija. Thank you so much to you and Indian Express. So, Katchatheevu is located 20 miles north of Ram Setu or Adam's Bridge, which in turn is just a little away from the Indian mainland. Its Dhanushkodi is located, as you know, in the Rameshwaram Island, which is just outside the Indian mainland, and Katchatheevu lies 20 miles north of the tip of Dhanushkodi. So, if you can imagine a triangle between Dhanushkodi, Katchatheevu, and the Sri Lankan, township of Talaimannar, then Katchatheevu lies at the top of the triangle, and it was born of a 14th century volcanic eruption. So that is what its history is like. It's about 724 odd years old, and it has been in the zamindari of the Setupatis since almost its inception. So the Setupatis were kings or rulers of the zamindari of Ramnath, which was constituted by 69 townships and 11 small islets, of which Katchatheevu was one. So since about the 15th century, particularly since 1605, since their alliance with the Madurai Nayaks, the Madurai dynasty, the Setupatis have ruled over Ramnath and therefore over Katchatheevu. However, as you hinted, in 1974, by a governmental ruling, Katchatheevu was awarded to Sri Lanka by the then Prime Minister Indira Gandhi. And it was awarded by dint of two very significant agreements, first in 1974 and then in 1976, which, for all intents and purposes, ruled Katchatheevu to be jointly administered. Although this was not exactly the language used in those agreements, they explicitly stated that while this island will henceforward belong to Sri Lanka's territories, it will nevertheless be accessible freely without any visa or without any kind of legal rulings to Indian pilgrims and particularly Indian fishermen, because Katchatheevu happened to be and still happens to be a very important resource for prawns. And particularly the 1970s and 1980s were a time of the blue revolution and the pink revolution when new kinds of nylon nets and prawning techniques were invented. So this agreement, definitely tilted even this granting of the island to Sri Lanka in favor of Indian fishers, because it, I think, legalized the mobilization of Indian fishers to what appeared to be a Sri Lankan territory until then, because the Katchatheevu issue is not actually a post-colonial issue. Although it was awarded in 1974 to Sri Lanka, the controversy around this island emerged since the late 19th century. If we want to go back in history, then since at least the 1870s or 1880s, a dire need was felt in the colonial administrations of India and Ceylon that we need to divide the maritime boundaries between India and Ceylon in the region known as Setu Samudra, which is also actually the name of a shipping project which was created in the late 1990s. So the region Setu Samudram had to be divided between the British administrations of India and Ceylon, and that is why since 1910 and particularly 1920s, delegates from both administrations started meeting to divide the maritime boundary. And what we are seeing now is actually a manifestation of those controversies, which were never really resolved.
Uh, that thank you, Arup, for this. But let's just go back to the past a little bit. And can you tell me a little bit about the history of the ownership of this island? You said that it was first owned by the Setupati dynasty. So how did what happened after that? How did it come to the British, the Dutch? What exactly went around with the ownership of this island before it finally went to Sri Lanka?
So one of the oldest antiquarian links to the Setupatis that we can still demonstrate is that in about 1620s, the then Setupati ruler issued copper plaques, which demonstrated the extent of the Setupati kingdom, or the zamindari, and it extended to up to Talai Mannar,
just
because
just to interrupt you a little bit, for a lot of viewers who would not know, can you explain who the Setupatis were? Where exactly were they located, just to simplify it for our audiences?
So the Setupatis are located, or were located, in the Ramnath Zamindari. They were located in and around Rameshwaram Island and Mandapa in India, and they were in alliance with the Madurai Nayaks, like I said, since at least the very early 17th century. Now the Setupatis, the name Setupati actually literally means the protector of the Setu, which is the Ram Setu. Hmm?
Oh.
And they have been in existence in power since at least the 13th and the 14th century, and they have also been instrumental in the construction of the present day Rameshwaram temple. So they are extremely important in India's cultural and political history. Now the Setupatis were in alliances with the Dutch, at times, partially with the Portuguese and also the English, and they were autonomous rulers of their respective regions. Like I said, 69, small townships and 11 islets, including Katchatheevu. In the 17th, 18th, and 19th centuries, several leases were granted either to the Dutch East India Company or the British East India Company, and these leases were signed between the company directors or authorities and the Setupatis. So, which signifies that the Setupatis have been the direct owners of this island till at least the 19th century. Now, in 1951, interestingly, the zamindari system was abolished. So, if the
Hmm.
zamindari system was abolished, the ethical and the legal proprietorship of the island of Katchatheevu, at least legally, ceases to belong to the Setupatis. One can make that argument, and I think this is the sort of argument that Sri Lanka started making, at least internally, in their own domestic conversations. And since the 1960s, these conversations became exceedingly shrill. So they reached the Indian Parliament. The first Indian Prime Minister, Honorable Shri Pandit Nehru, was exceedingly reluctant to even talk about Kachati, because for him it was not a matter of national prestige, whether to retain it or to discuss giving to Sri Lanka. I mean, these were matters which were significantly less important than, let's say, something like the expatriation of Tamil refugees in Sri Lanka, who've been living there since at least the 19th century. And I'm talking about Tamil refugees who been there to work on tea plantations. So there have been historic Tamils living in Sri Lanka, but there also have been modern colonial Tamils who have been sent there as indentured laborers. And it was the Indian government's duty and the Sri Lankan government's duty to expatriate these Tamil refugees. But instead of talking about that, there were shrill conversations happening also about Kachati. Now, so Pandit Nehru was reluctant to bring this up in the parliament. And whenever it was brought up in the parliament, he used to refer to it being the island of cacti and no drinking water, and which is true. It is profusely stocked with cacti. It has no political value. It has no practical value. It doesn't even have pastoral value. So it has no drinking water. The Sorry, you were.
If that is the case, why was Sri Lanka interested in this island
Well,
at all?
that's a very good question, particularly for current times. Now, Sini Kuppan, there was a merchant called Sini Kuppan who built a church in 1905 in Katchatheevu, and it was named the Saint Anthony's Church, who's now become the patron saint of Katchatheevu. And this church came to be controlled by the Catholic Diocese of Jaffna. hmm, since at least 1910. And this church was built for explicitly for fishermen to seek refuge during tempests or dry their nets, etc. Now, Sri Lanka began being interested in this island primarily for two reasons. Like I said, for all intents and purposes, India's ownership, the Setupati's ownership, was never questioned till the 1920s. In 1921, B. Horsberg, who was a Ceylonese principal collector of customs, and he was also, also had this reputation as an antiquarian. He was also very close to the polymath Ananda Kumaraswamy, Sri Lankan polymath, and several other Sri Lankan polymaths. Now, my reading is that B. Horsberg was one of the many colonial bureaucrats who were keen to sow seeds of divide and rule, because this is 1 year, 2 years after the Government of India Act. So the British are palpably aware that their days are coming to an end in India. And why not play a little mischief? B. Horsberg comes up with a remarkable argument. I mean, legally it's brilliant, but I think ethically it's deeply warped. He says that because St. Anthony's Church belongs to the Jaffna Diocese, because Sri Lankan authorities or some church institutions of British Ceylon has a proprietorship over a church in a 285-acre land, the entire land is supposed to henceforward belong to Ceylon. Now, this was not a good argument, even legally, but it was so unique, so unprecedented that the Indian delegations that were significantly, better prepared were actually rattled by Horsberg's argument because they had never encountered something like this. Anyhow, Horsberg did not win the argument, but what happened after this negotiation was that an imaginary fisheries line came into existence. So we are talking about two things here. One is the maritime boundary, the other is the fisheries line. So the fisheries line divides the maritime territory within which one and the other administration can fish. The maritime boundary divides the territories that belong to the two administrations. So the fisheries line came into existence 3 miles west of Katchatheevu, which means the territory until 3 miles west of Katchatheevu started being imagined as Ceylonese territory and later as Sri Lankan territory. Now, there was another reason why Sri Lanka was demanding it, particularly since the 1960s, because India had awarded lands to what is today Bangladesh in East Pakistan, and India had also awarded land around the Kutch to West Pakistan or present day Pakistan. In 1960, the Berubari Union case judgment in the Supreme Court of India ruled that no Indian territory could be awarded to a foreign administration without parliamentary consent. Now, this was a criterion which was unfortunately not technically fulfilled in the granting of Katchatheevu. So I have answered actually more than the questions that you raised. Sri Lanka was demanding Katchatheevu because India was also awarding territories to its other neighbors. And since the zamindari system had been abolished, so Sri Lanka thought it was a matter of self-esteem, a matter of prestige, which Nehru never really cared for so much because, I mean, it's 285 acres. It doesn't matter. Sri Lanka, until today, thinks that Katchatheevu contains petroleum reserves. Now, that claim has never been demonstrated empirically. I don't think there is scientific evidence yet or that we are aware of any such, but it has been a matter of great self-esteem for them, certainly. And it seems like because we are not aware about the history, at least to the degree that we should be, sometimes it seems like it's becoming a self-esteem issue for us as well. But it should not be.
So, you said that, for Nehru, it wasn't that big a deal. But definitely when it came to Indira Gandhi, she did award the island in 1974. So what changed by then? Why was her stance so different from that of Nehru?
There are multiple reasons actually, and her historical geostrategic context was very different. And of course, we don't really talk about the issue of feminism, which is also very important. She is the second ever female prime minister in the world, after the first ever prime minister, that is Sirimavo Bandaranaike, who's her interlocutor in this matter. So she awarding Katchatheevu to Sirimavo Bandaranaike has multiple, you know, I think motivations, and all very genuine. This is the time when Soviet and American navies are regimenting themselves largely in the Indian Ocean, and Indira Gandhi needs to put an end to that and declare the Indian Ocean as a zone of peace. So she needs Sri Lanka on her side, particularly 2 or 3 years after the conclusion of the Bangladeshi War of Liberation. So India needs to demonstrate to the world and United Nations that it is not an aggressive nation, and that is why it has to tie hands with India. So the awarding of Katchatheevu is important. Also, there's this Communist Party in Sri Lanka, which is creating excessive havoc in Sri Lankan society, particularly on the Tamil, and this is called the JVP, and it is also being influenced allegedly by Korean, North Korean, and Chinese influences since the 1970s. So to curb all that, Indira Gandhi needs to make a positive impact on Sri Lankan civil society as well. So she is, through this bilateral pact, she's making an impact in the United Nations, and she's making a great impact on Sri Lankan civil society. So I think it was a masterful act of statesmanship or stateswomanship.
All right. So basically, it was a diplomatic act at that point. What about, the Tamil Nadu political parties? How did they react to her decision? Also, the people of Tamil Nadu.
The Tamil parties were extremely skeptical, and they wanted parliamentary consent according to the Berubari Union case ruling. And because this consent was not technically provided to the Tamil Nadu Legislative Assembly, they described this as an unholy act of statesmanship. And this was particularly Ira Sarian, who on 23rd July stood up in the Tamil Nadu Legislative Assembly and criticized the then Prime Minister. So technically, because of the emergency powers in 1975 and 1976, uh, whatever parliamentary consent could be retrospectively sought was also not sought, because the legislative assemblies were in abeyance. Hence, it has been a burning issue in Tamil Nadu throughout 70s and 80s, also because the Setu Samudram, shipping corporation project, which was a dream of the DMK members, particularly Karunanidhi, was never, it was never really awarded by the center. Although late Prime Minister Shri Atal Bihari Vajpayee did sanction that project, and it went ahead for a little bit under the Manmohan Singh administration, the project was halted. So because of a complex array of factors, Katchatheevu has never really went out of fashion. But that has remained, a sentimental issue for the Tamil fishermen, for the Tamil politicians. It is very surprising for us to see that it is today becoming a central, bone of contention in Indian politics, because this was not really expected. We didn't see it in the 90s. Katchatheevu was not really discussed until maybe Prime Minister Narendra Modi discussed it last October or November in the Lok Sabha. So while it is understandable that Tamil parties have been quite upset about Katchatheevu, I think this we are staring into new in the fresh ground now when we see the Prime Minister referring to the island.
And why would you say that has been the case? Like, why has this issue suddenly emerged in the last few months?
I think because the halted Setu Samudram project has also not gone out of fashion, and because Tamil Nadu Legislative Assembly keeps on bringing up the Setu Samudram drum project, which was finally halted for the last time. It was halted in 2013 or 14, which envisages creating a continuous navigable passage between India and Sri Lanka, particularly between Dhanushkodi, Rameshwaram Island, and Talai Mannar. But that project is not feasible on multiple grounds, predominantly environmental grounds, and hence it was halted. And because Tamil Nadu Legislative Assembly considers the Setu Samudram project important, it is extremely important strategically. It is perhaps not sustainable economically, ecologically, and even transportationally, but for strategic reasons, particularly in the contemporary context of Chinese, string of pearls policies and also American interest in the Indian Ocean region, Setu Samudram project has become strategically more important. But because the Indian, perhaps, civil discourse will not accommodate discussions of marine passages between India and Sri Lanka for fear of disrupting or breaking the Ram Setu, as it were, I think this is a compensatory, act of discursivizing of bringing up Katchatheevu once again. So maybe if Tamil Nadu talks about Setu Samudram, I think we can now henceforward expect the center to talk about Katchatheevu. So, ironically, both are Tamil issues, and I think both need to be resolved at once. So the way forward is not to, incite civil society discourses. Rather, it is to create consensuses with Sri Lanka. I don't think Sri Lanka has much to gain from Katchatheevu even today, except there are Chinese personnel, or maybe one hears the Chinese PM now and then visiting Sri Lanka and happening to hover around Katchatheevu. But these are only strategic, displays. I don't think it has much, say, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. So India needs to build strong consensuses with Sri Lanka. That is the key ahead.
All right. Lastly, Professor Chatterjee, can you explain, give us any suggestions to our audiences on anything that they can read up on this issue to understand this further? Any book, any article that you think that might give a
So I
comprehensive
would
understanding?
Thank you, Adrija. That's that's very important. I think we should be reading a lot more. And two books that I can refer to is V. Suryanarayan, who's a very eminent scholar who has been writing on this subject for about 25 years at least now. In 1994, he published. Well, 30 years ago, 1994, he published Katchatheevu and the Problems of Indian Fishers in the Park Bay, and I think parts of this were republished as Conflict in the Park Bay region in 2005. Read these two books. My own book, which has been published by Routledge on Adams Bridge, which is a cultural and environmental, geological, and to some extent political history of the Adams Bridge region, also contains a chapter on Katchatheevu. So if it's not too much self-promotion, maybe that too won't be amiss.
Thank you so much. And thanks again for your time to speak with us and give us a very thorough understanding of this issue. Thank you for watching this video. If you found this conversation insightful, do subscribe to our channel Indian Express and do not miss further dialogues on important current issues.